Okay, so I've got a very brief time to summarise the Scottish Government's responses to some of your key recommendations around resources, carbon labelling and education. So on resources, I think the evidence group felt the response was pretty good. Obviously, the government are putting through legislation on phasing out single-use plastics, which is something you flagged up, and also really supportive around resource libraries right across Scotland, so that we can reduce the embodied energy of the goods and products that we consume. And I guess the Scottish Government really, they really embraced the idea of a circular economy, so reducing all of that energy and material flow. So on resources, the response we think was pretty good. On carbon labelling, it was kind of okay. Obviously, you had recommendations around looking at food and product labelling to give that kind of carbon information, which is crucial to help us all make an informed decision when we're buying things or using things. And the Scottish Government were really accepting of that and supportive of it. They did say, in terms of the recommendation around transport providers, so giving us that information if we're booking a flight or a train journey, what the carbon footprint is, that wasn't within their power to make providers give that information, which we kind of felt was a bit weak. Surely they could have that conversation with the transport providers, with other government agencies, UK government if required, to help inform us when we're making those decisions. So kind of mixed bag on carbon labelling. And the final one I'm going to cover is education. For education, we thought as an evidence group the responses were very good from the Scottish Government in general. So some really good kind of commitments around green apprenticeships and investment in climate education and green skills. They have their climate emergency skills action plan across the economy in terms of how they're going to embed climate and sustainability in education across Scotland, but also how they're going to help with career pathways, particularly for the existing workforce. So that seemed pretty strong. The only area where in education where the recommendations, the response was a little bit weak, we thought, was around education on diets. So dietary choice. We know that there's advice on what a healthy diet is, but in terms of advice on what a climate-friendly diet is and making sure that that's available to everyone across Scotland, that response seemed a little bit weaker. So that's our summary for resources, carbon labelling and education. Thank you.
Hello, I'm Pete Smith from the University of Aberdeen. In relation to diet and land use, you recommended that the Scottish Government up its ambition for peatland restoration and woodland creation, accelerate the shift towards more sustainable agriculture and do more to encourage low carbon, plant-based foods in the Scottish diets. In terms of upping its ambition for peatland restoration and woodland creation, the response from the government was good, committing to increase its ambition on both of these. Indeed, during the climate negotiations in Glasgow, COP26, the Scottish Government increased its yearly targets from 12,000 to 18,000 hectares per year of new woodland by 2024 to 2025. On these aspects, I think the government response was good. In terms of more sustainable agriculture and diets, you made these specific recommendations. Support farmers to transition to low carbon farming, include climate footprints in food labelling, encourage plant-based food through public procurement, for example, in hospitals, schools and council buildings, have a plant-based diet week once in the year, and provide more education for public information to encourage people to eat more plant-based foods. In response to these suggestions, the government focuses in on encouraging local low-carbon foods, but it doesn't fully embrace the transition to plant-based foods. The call for a plant-based diet was completely ignored. By not fully adopting your recommendations, the Scottish Government, in my opinion, is missing out on an important tool to fight climate change. The Climate Change Committee has suggested that we need to cut meat and dairy consumption by 20% by 2030, with even greater reductions after 2030. And it's warned the Scottish Government that it's failed to cut greenhouse gas emissions from agriculture fast enough and has insufficient plans to encourage the dietary transition. The government had an opportunity to show more ambition in response to your recommendations, which were in line with the expert recommendations of the Climate Change Committee. But in my opinion, their responses on supporting farmers to transition to low carbon farming and encouraging dietary change were among their weakest responses.